Mick West, back on the JV podcast. A pleasure as always.
Hi Jay, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, man. Obviously, been enjoying the sunny weather here and also the crazy storms we've been having over in England. How's everything over your end?
Excellent. It's been a bit hot. Summer has finally arrived. It actually rained a couple of days ago. It normally never rains at this time of year. It's a bit strange. The weather's been a bit odd this year, but it's nice.
Yeah.
Having fun.
No, I mean, appreciate you coming back on for the third time. Obviously, last time I had
Yeah,
you on, you debated Tony Sambotti, which was interesting.
that was fun.
Yeah, got a lot of comments on that video. Obviously, thanks to Joe retweeting it as well, which exposed the video quite a lot. And then a load of people threw in shill comments, and then other people were like, Mick was always talking over Tony. Then other people were like, Tony was always talking over Mick, and I was just kind of like, okay, I'm just gonna leave this to everyone else. No point trying to
Well, yeah,
respond.
I think we both got like quite a lot of words in there, so I think it was pretty good exchange of views. I'm not sure if we convinced anybody, but I think it's always good to have dialogue with people. It's better to actually try to at least understand where the other person is coming from. So I like talking to Tony, even though like I do disagree with the way he interprets certain things. But I think the more discussions we can have, the closer we're all going to come to some kind of understanding of what actually happened.
Yeah, I think that's important, and obviously, I know you've got your book coming out, which is called "Escaping the Rabbit Hole."
I do, and in fact, I just got paper copies of it today. These are the advanced reader copies, which are not perfect, but they're the ones that we send out to reviewers and people that we want to have a look at the book before it comes out. So that's quite exciting. I just spent like 6 months or so working on the book, and it's finally getting to the stage where it's actually a real book now.
What inspired you to kind of start writing that book? Because obviously, I know you've done a lot of debunking stuff, and
Yeah.
the market's
Well,
quite. I was just going to say the market's quite saturated with like conspiracy books out there, like 9/11 and all that stuff, and there's not really so much, say, a market which is kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum that I've seen, like that's well published or well known. They're all kind of YouTube videos or whatever. So, what kind of motivated you to get that going?
Well, I write on Metabunk, and I write a lot on Metabunk. I actually added up one day, like all the words I'd written on Metabunk, and it came to be something like, over 1 million words, because I've been writing on Metabunk, every week for many years, and it all adds up. And I thought, like, the stuff I'm writing, there's some useful stuff in there, but it's all spread out all over the site. And what I wanted to do was kind of distill the stuff that I've learned over the years into a useful format of a book, so someone can just like take it, read through the core stuff, and get something out of it. And there's so much stuff on Metabunk, I couldn't really just shoehorn everything into there. So I tried to focus on one key aspect, which is how do people get into the rabbit hole and how do they get out? Which is kind of two aspects, but it's about the journey of people who get caught up in conspiracy theories, and how did that happen, and how did they find their way out if they did? Of course, a lot of people never find their way out, and people go down the rabbit hole in very different ways, and they go down different rabbit holes, and there's some rabbit holes are more extreme than others. You can look at some conspiracy theories, like for example the JFK conspiracy theories, and you could see like perhaps there might be some fairly reasonable things going on there in terms of like theories that people might wonder about. Maybe Lee Harvey Oswald was working for the Russians. That's a possible conspiracy theory. Maybe he was working with the mob. Yeah, but then you start getting a little bit further along, and they become less and less likely. Some people think that the driver of the car turned around and shot JFK. So there are these spectrums of conspiracy theories. So I think even people who believe in conspiracy theories could get something out of the book, because everybody has some conspiracy theories that they don't believe in. And everyone knows someone who believes in some conspiracy theory that they personally don't believe in. So even if you believe in JFK, or even if you believe in some of the 9/11 conspiracy theories, or even if you believe in chemtrails, there's often someone still who's more extreme, further along on the spectrum, who could benefit from the advice that I have in the book. How do you talk to people? How do you understand where they're coming from, and how do you help them come to a clearer perspective about what's actually going on in the world?
Yeah, I mean, with sort of even people that I know, like I draw the line. I mean, I'm into a conspiracy here and there, and like the
Yeah.
Madeleine McCann case, there's like conspiracies around that, and they kind of interest me. And I draw the line sort of when people start telling me like the Earth's flat or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
And some people, they're avid followers. I mean, on this morning in England, it's like a sort of show with Philip Schofield, and that they had three people on there that believed the Earth was flat and were saying,
Right.
we've done these tests across this lake. There's no curve, and
Hmm.
the photos from NASA are CGI and whatever. Just all the kind of generics. And obviously Philip Schofield was like, well, I was one of those people that was lucky enough to fly on Concorde, 60,000 feet in the air, or whatever. I think it's something like that. And he's like, I've seen the curve of the
Yeah.
Earth, so am I in there with the society like who's
They
selling
they
a
would
lie?
probably say yes.
Yeah, well, one of them
Yeah.
replied with apparently scientists say that you have to be above 60,000 feet in the air to even see the curvature of the Earth, and I think it's one of those things that maybe a lot of, because there's a lot of misinformation out there, a lot
Uh-huh.
of different scientists' opinions and things like that. But what's your take on the flat Earth theory, and sort of, I know you've spoke about it till you're blue in the face, but say the height that you'd have to be to see the curvature?
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting little problem of science. Like, how high do you have to be to see the curve of the Earth? Because there's two things at play. Like, one is like the higher you get above the Earth, like the more curved it's going to look. But the higher you get, the further away the horizon becomes. So as you get higher and higher, the horizon gets further and further away. So when you're at sea level, you're like about, you're standing on the beach, you're only like 6 feet above the water. Then the horizon is relatively close, depending on, how much you crouch or stand up or whatever. It could be anything from like 3 to like 20 miles or so. But it's still relatively close, so you can see a sharp line. Now, if you go up in a plane to like 30,000 feet and you look out, you'll see the horizon looks really, really indistinct and blurry, because you're looking through loads and loads of atmosphere. You're looking through like 200 miles of atmosphere to see the horizon, so you can't really see it very clearly. So it turns out there's kind of two areas where you can see the curve of the horizon. One of them is kind of getting above 40,000 feet. You can kind of start to see it through the atmosphere, because the atmosphere itself kind of becomes curved at that point, like visibly curved. And you can see the top of the atmosphere curving. If you get above like 45 and up to 60,000 feet, you can definitely see it from up there. But you can also see it at a much lower altitude of about 500 feet, which sounds like ridiculous. Yeah, most people, I tell them this, like, you get 500 feet. If you can't see it at 30,000 feet, how can you see it from 500 feet?
Yeah.
But the reason you can see it is that when you're at 500 feet, it's like a sweet spot where there's not that much a distance between you and the horizon. So it's just enough so you can see it clearly. You can see a very, very sharp line. And so if you get a straight edge, like a ruler or something, and you just hold it up, you have to get a pretty long one that's about like 4 or 5 feet. If you hold that up against the horizon, you can actually see it's a little bit higher in the middle, a little bit lower at either end. So if you go to like 500 feet, you can actually do this experiment. It works best if you take a picture with a camera, but you can actually see it with your eyes. If you take a ruler up to about 500 feet and you've got a nice clear day and you've got a nice wide view of the horizon. But if you go higher than that, you won't be able to see it because it becomes too blurry. So it only works at this one height. And everyone argues, like, can you see it from 30,000 feet? Well, I mean, you could if there wasn't any atmosphere, but there is, so it's all blurry. No one can get to like 45,000 feet generally, unless you've got a private jet. But you can actually do this at 500 feet. So you can go find a cliff somewhere and look at the curve of the Earth.
Yeah, and if you're real flat earther, maybe just jump off and see what happens. Gravity
Well, they
might
don't
just
believe in
take
gravity.
Yeah, yeah.
But
I mean, gravity's the sort of the one of the fundamental arguments, and I always say to people, in my opinion, they're quarrelling over the name of it. Like, oh, we don't know it. We don't know. We've never been able to really test it. We don't know it's there. But you throw something in the air and it comes back to the ground. The water's held to the air, earth. Blah 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 blah.
yeah,
And I always say to people, you're kind of quarrelling over the name, like whether it's called gravity
yeah,
or chocolate. Like, it doesn't matter. That's what's happening. Like, you're seeing the effect happen, whether it's gravity, whether you call it whatever you want. You're still kind of seeing that effect happen. And science has obviously said this is what it's called. This is why it happens, because
exactly.
blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But people seem to kind of go, gravity doesn't exist, prove it, blah blah blah. Or when someone's dropped a ball in a glass of water, the water doesn't shape around the ball, and I'm like, well, it's obviously to do with some sort of I'm obviously not a scientist or anything, but it's obviously to do with some sort of physics and density and whatever else, of the ball. And
Well, it's because the Earth is pulling the water off.
yeah,
The Earth is a big ball in space. So if you got a big ball in space and you tried that, you'd have the same effect as the Earth. But if you got like a tiny ball on the Earth, it's a completely different situation. But the example with gravity is a great one, because that's another thing. Something I really encourage people to do in the book. Like, one of the key techniques is, don't just explain things to people. Like, try to figure out some way of showing things to people, or tell them a way they can go and test it for themselves. Like that thing with the horizon is a good example. And with gravity, there's another thing you can do. You can take a very small scale, like a little jewelry measuring scale. You can get it for about $10 on Amazon, probably less, probably the same in the UK. And you can get a weight, and you can weigh it at sea level, or just wherever you happen to live. Then you can get in your car and you can drive up a mountain, like drive up like 2,000 feet. Might be a bit hard in England because you don't have any high mountains. But around here, it's quite easy. You can get in your car and you can drive 6,000 feet up. And then you can weigh the weight again, and you'll find it's a little bit lighter, because you're further away from the center of the Earth. So you're actually proving that gravity is a force that depends on the distance. And it's not a density thing, because when you go higher up, the air is less dense. So if it was density, the weight would actually weigh more, because it's even more dense relative to the Earth. So you're proving that it's not density, and you're proving it's like a force, like you say, that's proportional to the distance from the Earth. So you can actually do all these things to confirm what the scientists have been telling you.
I mean, it's the same with going into a submarine, I guess, and going so close. Like, the lower you go, the more the pull becomes a problem. I mean, I had an old school teacher. He used to be work for the Marines or whatever, and he was in a submarine for ages. And he said that he was obviously in low water, and he said he definitely thinks that's what made him shrink, because he's fucking tiny. But obviously, these are things that happen. I mean, another argument people seem to use is that they get that like P90X whatever special camera with the lens, and they zoom in at boats, and
I've got
obviously
one of those. Yeah, somewhere.
And they say, oh, we can still, your eye can't see it anymore, because apparently your eye's showing it's going over the horizon. So let's zoom in even further with this lens, and obviously then you can see the full boat, which I have seen a few videos like that. And they try and use that as sort of one of their smoking guns of like, well,
yeah, but it's ridiculous, because when you're zooming in, all it does is it makes the picture bigger. So if you took like the image with it zoomed out and the image with it zoomed in, the reason you can't see it is that the boat is less than 1 pixel on screen. It's just this tiny little thing that you can't even see. So if you take that picture and you magnify it, you're not going to see anything because there's some pixels there. But if you zoom in like just enough so you can start to see it, then you'll see that the image there is exactly the same as the one when you zoom in. It doesn't change. Yeah. When you zoom in on something, it doesn't make things rise up over the horizon. And this is a type of thing people have known for, have been known since they invented telescopes, because they could see these things. It's quite bizarre, because like it's people people want to believe in their theories, so they kind of convince themselves that this is what's going on. Like with the zooming in on things, they convince themselves that something's rising up over the horizon, but it's not. If you actually look at it carefully, you'll see that it's just simply getting bigger. It's coming from a point. It's getting bigger. It's not. There's no more or less of it being observed. You're just magnifying things. And these are things you can verify yourself. You can try it on a small scale. You can, stick something on a table and zoom in and out, or on a football field. And the thing is, though, that they do this sometimes, and they see things appear to disappear behind a football field. Like, someone will walk down a football field, and they'll see his feet disappear. But that's happening because the football field has a crown in the middle, so the water runs off it. And yet they say it's flat, and then they say, oh, this is happening because of perspective, and this football field is flat. And in fact, no, they're just actually showing exactly the same thing that happens, on the globe, Earth, and they're just kind of missing a bit of information.
So, talk to me about, obviously in your book you've got a part where you talk about the shill card. What have you gone through, like, personally, and what have you written about in your book? Because obviously I know a lot of people are like, Mick West, he's a shill,
Yeah.
sell out. What's your sort of take on all of that?
Well, the shill card chapter of my book is basically where I tell my story about where I come from, and why I do what I do, how I can afford to do what I do, and why I think it's important to do what I do. And the reason I wrote a whole chapter explaining all of that is that people will say that I'm a government shill. They'll say that I'm being paid to do this, and they don't ever present any evidence that I'm being paid, or that I'm a government shill or whatever. The only reason that they're saying this is that they disagree with me, or rather I disagree with them. And they can't understand why someone would disagree with them, because from their point of view, it seems very obvious. If you're a 9/11 truth believer who believes in the controlled demolition theory, those individuals are very deeply committed to that belief. Like they believe very, very strongly that it's obvious that it must have been explosions. They'll say, "Can't you see the explosions?" I mean, you might think the same thing yourself about some of the 9/11 collapses. It seems obvious, so they don't understand why I can't see what they're seeing, and so they make the leap that I must be a government shill. But the reason I'm disagreeing with them is that I think that they are wrong. It's not because I'm being paid. It's because I think they are incorrect. And I think it's important that people, that the true version of the events should come out as much as possible. I think if people are believing these false versions of events, then it's not good. For a start, it's not good for them, because they're going to have these weird beliefs that kind of isolate them from society, because everyone thinks that they're crazy tinfoil hatters, is what people are going to call them. And I don't think it's good for society to have these false beliefs be prevalent amongst large sections of the population. Now, you might say, like, well, what's the harm of people believing in things? Why shouldn't people believe whatever they want? I mean, yeah, sure, yeah, people can believe whatever they want. You can believe in religion and things like that. But people here are believing in things that are demonstrably wrong. I'm not trying to force people to not believe these things. I'm just showing them some information that they might be missing that will help them come to a more reasonable understanding of what happened. Like with the say the 9/11 attacks, one of the pieces of evidence that people put out there is that after the 9/11 attacks, in the dust, they found these things called iron microspheres, which are very, very small iron balls, essentially. And they say the only way these iron microspheres could have formed is during very, very hot temperatures of steel, basically steel melting and vaporizing and then reforming in little spheres. And the only thing that could do that, they say, is thermite. So they will say that the presence of these iron microspheres is proof that the buildings must have been demolished. And people accept that because it sounds reasonable. It sounds, how else could these iron spheres have got there? It's not, iron spheres aren't something that's very common to find. Obviously, like, it was very, very hot, and jet fuel only burns at whatever, 1600 degrees, and it couldn't have made these iron spheres. So people accept that as evidence. But what I would do is try to show them evidence that they're missing. I would show them that there are actually many, many ways of making iron microspheres. The simplest way is to use a cigarette lighter. If you've got just a standard cigarette lighter, which, it's got sparks and gas, you do the little thing. The flint rubs against steel, makes some sparks. And those sparks that you see on a cigarette lighter are actually iron microspheres. You can actually take your lighter, take a magnet, put it behind like a bit of paper or something, and just like spark it a few times. And you'll get like a little black ring or a little black square around your magnet on the paper. And you can take that black dust and you can look at it under a microscope, and you'll see these tiny little spheres of iron, just from just a few strikes of your lighter. And that's obviously, like, there's not lots of lighters going off during the World Trade Center collapse, but that's just one example of a way that they can be made that people might not be aware of. They might think that the only way you can make these things is from thermite.
I mean,
then another really
yeah,
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say about that as well. Like, obviously, you have got concrete rubbing against steel beams as it's collapsing, and other materials.
You do, yeah.
Sparks from electrical equipment or whatever, which could obviously cause, the same thing. And obviously, when I had Richard Gage on, he spoke a lot about thermite being used, and that was kind of one of his key points. Is like, this was found all over, so therefore it must prove to be thermite.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. Like, you get this evidence that gets repeated over and over again. People say, like, we found these iron microspheres, and they because people aren't given the full context, they aren't given the additional information. They accept that as evidence. Now, one of the biggest sources of iron microspheres is arc welding. When the welding things with electricity, and you get this really bright light, and you get sparks flying everywhere. Those sparks, again, are iron microspheres. And when the towers were constructed, there was a huge amount of arc welding going on. The columns themselves were basically put one on top of the other, and a lot of the lower columns had this really deep groove that went all the way around the column. It's about an inch or two deep. And then they used arc welding basically to fill that in, just by going back and forth over these deep grooves. So there were sparks flying over and over, like millions and millions of sparks, like being generated, like for hours and hours, for days and days, end on end. And all those spheres, they end up inside the building. It's just dust. Some of them are going to brush it away, but because it's a construction site, there's just dust everywhere. And then when they put down the concrete to make the floors, all the dust or whatever that's on there just gets like trapped in there. And then when the building collapses, it's all freed up. And these spheres, they can last in there indefinitely because they're essentially indoors at that point, so they're not exposed to the elements, so they're not going to rust or disappear. So it's actually an expected thing to find loads and loads of iron microspheres. I actually made a bunch of them myself. I got like some iron microspheres that I made in this little thing here. They come in all different sizes. Some of them are very, very small, and some of them about a millimeter is about the biggest one. It's really easy to make them with arc welding. I just just did a little bit of welding, and you can imagine the amount of welding that actually went on in the World Trade Center must have been just quite staggering. So it's hardly surprising that there were iron microspheres in the rubble.
You do a bit of sort of debunking on your own YouTube channel as well. I mean, I saw a video with like column blocks, and you were sort of showing the metal rods bending and things like that.
Yeah.
Talk to me sort of about that experiment and things, that other things you've sort of done on your channel as well.
Yeah, and that's like, there's the famous thing, jet fuel can't melt steel beams. And, there's a lot of versions of misunderstanding of that. But a lot of people still don't really understand just how much heat can weaken something like a steel beam. So I did a bunch of experiments just using butane torch, which burns at a similar temperature to just regular hydrocarbon, like whatever, paper and wood and jet fuel. They all burn at kind of similar temperatures. And I took a steel bar and then just supported it between two blocks and then just heated it. And you see that the bar pretty rapidly starts to just sag and bend. And it's not melting. It's just bending because it's getting weaker. Um, I also did an experiment where I made my own thermite, which is a fun experiment. I would recommend anybody do it. It's a little dangerous. It's a little dangerous making your own thermite. Well, making it isn't dangerous because it's actually pretty stable. It's hard to light it, but once you burn it, it's hard to stop it. I used it. Here's a steel column analog that I use, like the equivalent of a steel column, and I actually burnt through it with thermite, and you can see this slag coming off the sides, and you can see this white dust right here. And it's dark here, and it's white dust here, and there's a whole bunch of little microspheres on the side of this column, and it's pretty interesting that thermite actually has a kind of microsphere signature. If you look very closely at these microspheres, which obviously we can't do over the internet, you'll see that there's two types of spheres. There's white ones and there's gray ones. The gray ones are iron, and the white ones are aluminum oxide, because I use aluminum thermite, aluminium oxide, as you call it in England. And what happens with these little microspheres is they very often combine together, and you get like kind of a big white one with a smaller black one inside it, and it looks just like an eyeball. So it looks like you've got all these tiny little microscopic eyeballs littering the surface of this piece of steel, and that's kind of a signature of thermite. And these eyeball microspheres are something that no one has ever reported seeing in the World Trade Center site, which kind of indicates to me that it wasn't thermite, because if it was thermite, you would be seeing these eyeball microspheres, like made out of the oxide and the metal itself. So that was kind of a fun little result that I wasn't expecting. I was just trying to see how many microspheres you get from thermite, and it was obviously fun blowing things up. But it was an interesting result, and I think it could be quite significant.
Yeah, I mean, I think with a lot of sort of people who follow conspiracies, they'll kind of pick and choose what they want to believe. So, for example, someone would say, yeah, thermite was used because this is there, but then they're also not reporting or giving you the honest truth because a certain element that's also linked to thermite when you use thermite wasn't found, or there was no signs of it. And it's kind of like you're being dishonest to people when you're not reporting the whole spectrum. Like you can't, people want you to follow what you believe, but yeah, you need to kind of be more open and honest and be like, yeah, okay, like we believe it's thermite, but it might not be because we haven't found any of this substance, but this is the closest thing we can see to why thermite could be used. If you get what I mean with what I'm
do,
saying.
yeah, yeah, and I think part of that comes from people not exactly trying to figure out what happened, but really trying to like only look for evidence for one thing. So they're only looking for the evidence that thermite was used. They're not looking for evidence that thermite was not used. So it wouldn't even occur to them to, remark upon the absence of these aluminum oxide microspheres, because for them, from their point of view, that's not a good thing to to notice. So that they're trying to make a case rather than figure out what's going on. And I think that's something that probably like everyone is guilty of to a degree. You get this confirmation bias, where if you find something that confirms what you think, you tend to really focus on that one thing. But yes, being selective is definitely a problem, I think, within the 9/11 truth community. A good example is there was a Dutch demolition expert called Danny Juenko, and he was asked by a TV documentary film crew to look at the film Loose Change, which shows the collapses of the Twin Towers and of World Trade Center Building 7. And if you look on the Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth website, they say that one of the main pieces of evidence, I think it's like number 7 of their list of 10, is that the top demolition expert in Europe said that Building 7 was a controlled demolition. And that's and they're basing it on Danny Juanco looking at this Building 7 thing from Loose Change. He was only seeing it for the first time. But anyway, he looked at it and he said, oh yeah, that's obviously a controlled demolition, and this is how they would have done it. And that's pretty compelling evidence, really. If you got the top demolition expert in Europe saying it was a controlled demolition, then that seems like very good evidence. However, the selectiveness comes in there, in that in the same documentary, about 5 or 10 minutes earlier, they'd shown him pictures or video of World Trade Center 1 and World Trade Center 2 collapsing. And he said, that's obviously not a controlled demolition. He said, there's no way it could possibly be a controlled demolition. They wouldn't have time to do it. Like the fires would have set off the explosives. It looks like it's collapsing naturally because from what he can see, that's just what would happen when the building would collapse. It's gravity that's driving the collapse. And there's no way they could do it without leaving any evidence. So he gave his expert opinion. So now we've got the top demolition expert in Europe saying that 9/11, the towers collapse were not a controlled demolition, but Building 7 was. So Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, they only use the second one. They only use the World Trade Center 7. And they don't use the fact that he said the exact opposite thing about the other buildings, which they also think were controlled demolition. So they're being very selective, which I think is rather a bit dodgy.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm a rational person. I think if you're going to provide information on something, you need to provide both sides, or at least quote someone fully on what they're saying. I mean, it's like me editing this video and at the start where you've said, the JFK, some of the conspiracies could be quite reasonable, and I just used that section and I'm like, Mick West agrees with the conspiracy theory, JFK. It's kind of like dishonest and clickbaity and whatever else is involved. I mean, still obviously going on about 9/11, the only other sort of things I've found is like the issues with the commission report, because I watched I can't remember his name, he's an Italian guy, but he did a documentary and it's called The New Pearl Harbor, and anyone can find it obviously on YouTube, and he just basically shows that there's issues with the timings of certain situations, where say Dick Cheney was in a room with one of the guys, and then he said he didn't arrive there until 9:50 and the stand down order was given at 9:35, and there's little bits and bobs that the commission report sort of falls maybe flat on, and you've had guys stand up and in front of the Congress or whatever and say that a young guy asked if the order still stood, and the vice president said, of course the order still stands, and that's kind of a lot of what people uses. But there are a lot of other things.
They do, but they never say what that order actually was.
Yeah.
They're making assumptions there, that it was an order to shoot down the planes, or was it an order to do something else? I mean, like, if it's an order to shoot down the planes, like, why are they doing that if they're in on the conspiracy? It doesn't make any sense.
I mean, obviously as well, like I think the plane that came towards the Pentagon, the one that hit the Pentagon in the end, it was heading towards the White House at one point, and it actually enters. They show in the documentary, they show this graph of like red circle spaces around the White House, and if anything enters that area, it's like a no-fly zone. It'll be shot down, and it never gets shot down, and then obviously it just turns and veers towards the Pentagon or whatever. I'm sure it's something like that. I may be completely
no,
wrong.
it's the thing about things like that is that again, they don't give you all the information. The Pentagon is right next to a busy airport, so there's planes flying around there all the time. and they're not going to just like the instant a plane flies into the airspace shoot it down. I don't think they even have things like missiles and things at the Pentagon. They, if there was some kind of threat, they would rely on fighter jets like taking it down. This was something that they had not anticipated. But these no-fly zones, the military no-fly zones, if you fly into one, and this happens all the time, even now, planes will fly by accident into no-fly zones, then you'll get contacted first by air traffic control, and if they can't contact you, then they will send up a jet to intercept you, and the jet will fly in front of you and waggle its wings, and then you'll go, oh shit, and then you'll follow it. And that happens all the time. No one's ever been shot down. The US has never shot down a civilian plane for accidentally going into military airspace. It just doesn't happen. They send up a jet and they follow them, and then it generally takes care of it. And if it's a hijack situation, they're only going to do it if it poses a risk. And now, hijacks really don't happen because we have all these new security things in place. And before 9/11, all the hijacks were basically people taking over the plane and flying it somewhere. So everything changed after 9/11. So we never got the chance to actually, shoot things down because it doesn't happen anymore.
I suppose also it's kind of that chaos as well that was going on.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
People are focused on other things and not realizing this is going on or whatever. So there definitely could have been mistakes made. I mean, I watched that documentary.
Mistakes definitely were made. Definitely, yes. And one of the things about people talk about, was there a cover up? And it might be that some things were covered up because it's like it's like people don't want to take responsibility, or they want to protect people who they think were just doing their job but made a mistake. Like there was a couple of fighter jets sent up to intercept. Well, not even to intercept. I don't know exactly what they were sent up, but the orders weren't given precisely. So the jets were sent up in the air, and they just went to their standard rendezvous point, and that was in the opposite direction from where they were supposed to go. And you can hear the actual discussion of this online. Like some guy says, "Where are the jets?" And the other guy says, "Oh, they're at like Point Alpha," and says, "What the fuck are they doing over there? They should be over in Washington." And then it says, "I don't care if they break any windows on the way, get them over here." And by that time, it was too late because they just messed up. And obviously things like that are going to happen in a chaotic situation that no one's ever experienced before. Plane flies into the World Trade Center. We almost get used to it now because we think about it so often. If you're interested in conspiracy theories, but I was just it was like mind blowing at the time. And even people who experienced military people, it was just beyond their comprehension as to what was actually going on at the time. So it's perfectly understandable that people mess things up on that day.
So why do you think people cling on to conspiracy theories, and how do you think they sort of fall deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole? Do you think like YouTube and stuff like that's got a...
Yeah, I do. In fact, I started out when I was writing the book, Escaping the Rabbit Hole. I was going to do a long section on the psychological reasons behind why people fall for conspiracy theories. And there's actually quite a bit of research on this. Like people will do research to try to correlate two things. They say if a person tends to be distrustful of authority, then does that make him a conspiracy theorist later on in life? And they just do surveys, and they figure out this thing leads to conspiracies and this thing doesn't. One thing that is very common is a need for uniqueness. There's a way of measuring how much a person wants to be unique. They just figure this out by little survey questions. They say do you feel like you get your information yourself, or you have it given to you? Do you feel like you're different from other people? Do you feel like when people talk about you, or blah blah blah? So they just ask these questions, and this is kind of a little psychological thing. And then they say, oh yeah, well, if people who score highly on this thing, they're 5% more likely to believe in conspiracy theories. But that only kind of works on average, and it's not really a really big significant thing. And if you're looking at an individual, you just got to ask, why did this particular person fall down the rabbit hole? And I spent a lot of time interviewing people trying to figure out why all these individuals did, and invariably the reason they did was something like YouTube. They watched videos that were compelling. You watch a video like New Pearl Harbor or Loose Change or any video like that, Zeitgeist, and if you watch it at a point in your life when you're receptive to that type of thing, and if you do watch a couple of them in a row, you can just kind of get sucked in because it sounds very reasonable. If you look at if you didn't know anything about the 9/11 conspiracy theories, and you just got 9/11 in New Pearl Harbor, and you watch that, it's quite compelling if you know nothing else.
Mm.
So someone watches that and they go, "Oh my God, I didn't know any of this." This is absolutely incredible. This is mind blowing. This explains everything. Now I know. Now have I figured it out. I've got to tell people about this. I've got to find more about it. I've got to try and stop it. They get all excited and they feel special that they've got this information, and they straight away they go and watch another video, or they watch the same video again, and you watch a few more, and it takes you deeper into the rabbit hole. If you watch one, you watch another, and you watch something that's a bit more extreme even, and that takes you a little bit deeper. And you just get more and more sucked in by these videos. And eventually it kind of becomes this self-reinforcing thing. People actually stay up all night watching videos because they enjoy watching them, because they feel like they're getting information that nobody else knows. They feel like it's really, really important that they get this information, and it just sucks them in. But I don't think there's anything particularly like psychological about them that's a major factor. I think it can actually happen to anyone. I'm sure people who are a bit eccentric.
Yeah.
And some of them may believe in conspiracy theories, and some of them not. Just because you're eccentric doesn't mean that you're going to believe in every conspiracy theory that's out there. Most people who believe in conspiracy theories are just perfectly ordinary people. There's lots of crazy people who go to football games. It doesn't mean that everyone who goes to a football game is a crazy person.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, with the YouTube sort of side of things, I guess the suggestions page doesn't always help. I mean, it helps with channel growth and stuff like that, but the main thing is sort of you watch one conspiracy 9/11 documentary or even Sandy Hook or whatever, and then in the suggestion box or the next one that plays will be another conspiracy and then another conspiracy, and you kind of, if one of them's 30 minutes and you've got 4 hours spare, you've watched 4 of them with all this information, and before you know it you're like, oh my god, it's a conspiracy because all these things don't add up. But yet people don't ever watch this conspiracy thing and then go, right, I want to try and debunk these, or look for the debunk or whatever. As Joe Rogan says, like, the debunk isn't sexy, no one wants that.
It's not sexy.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, YouTube, the way YouTube is set up now is that YouTube has these algorithms where when you watch a video, the algorithm is going to try to figure out what video would keep you watching. So it's actually trying to get you addicted. So once you go a little bit in one direction, the algorithm thinks, oh, this is the type of thing this person wants to see. What are the most addictive videos I can show this person? Because all this algorithm is doing, it's not like trying to get you addicted for any nefarious purpose. It's trying to get you addicted so that you'll look at like the adverts that come up on the bottom of the video or in between the videos. So they're just trying to make money. So they design these algorithms so that they keep you hooked in. So if you watch, say 9/11 New Pearl Harbor, for example, it thinks, oh, I'll show him Zeitgeist next because people who have watched 9/11 New Pearl Harbor tend to also watch this movie or give it thumbs up or whatever. And so it kind of pulls you down the rabbit hole. It doesn't just allow you to fall down the rabbit hole. It's actually like YouTube is actually deliberately, in its like blind robot artificial intelligence way, is actually pulling you down the rabbit hole by getting you more and more addictive videos and getting you deeper and deeper into it.
So what's your take on false flag events? Because I know you also mentioned that in your book, and I think Sandy Hook and like the Boston bombings and sort of other school shootings, I've heard a lot of people talk about, oh, this is another false flag event because the government wants to take away our rights or whatever like that.
Yeah, that's kind of a difficult one to deal with, really, because it's such an emotional one for a lot of people. If you say like, "Oh, no one died at Sandy Hook," then people quite understandably get upset. There was a recent shooting here in America in a church, and some false flag guy made it his mission to go and try to expose this as a false flag, even though it wasn't. And he actually went there and started harassing people. He would stop. Like there was one woman whose children had been killed in this church, and he was like stopping her in the car and telling her that it was all fake and that she was just an actor, and it's terrible. But the thing about the false flag things is they never pan out. If you look at the evidence, it never actually holds up to any kind of scrutiny. You always get the exact same types of things going on. Like, for example, you will always get the claim that there were more than one shooter. And that comes from basically the same thing every time. Every single time this happens, the police look for a second shooter because they don't know how many shooters there are. Just because, like, someone calls the police and says, someone's shooting, they don't know how many people that is. It could be 2 people, it could be 1 person, it could be 5 people. So they always automatically look for a second shooter. The media reports that the police are still looking for a second shooter, and that just becomes this little legend that they start thinking that there's a second shooter. It happens all the time, and there's always a conspiracy about it. But this second shooter never shows up. There's never any photos or any evidence or anything that actually shows him there. And this has happened since JFK. In JFK, people thought there was a second shooter. Lots of people still do. And it's for the same type of reason, because when Kennedy was shot, no one knew how many shooters there were. He had no idea. All he heard was bang, bang, bang. And they don't know where it was coming from, and they don't know when he was shot, his head exploded, but they didn't know whether he was shot from the front or the back because they didn't have time. They obviously couldn't slow motion replay it at the time. So there's all this confusion at the start. They have no understanding of the people there. The police have no understanding of what actually happened, and it takes a while to piece it together. So in all these cases, you get these incomplete stories that change. And that's another thing that they base the false flag things on. The stories will always change because you start out with a very chaotic situation, and you start out with the media repeating things that they've heard, and then you get this kind of Chinese whispers or telephone thing where people will say something and then they'll tell somebody else. There'll be a headline, someone will repeat it, and it just changes in the telling, and it grows in the telling. So people will say they're looking for a second shooter, and then they'll say, oh, there is a second shooter. So it just kind of grows because people are just repeating it. But once things settle down, you get the actual story of what actually happened. All these things just fall away. All these things that people said were evidence turn out not to be evidence. Like in the Boston bombing, there was a tweet about an explosion that was going to happen, and someone posted it, and it was timestamped before the bombing. And so that sounds like evidence, but then you look into it and they just looked at it from a different time zone. They looked at it from California instead of the East Coast, and so it looked like it was earlier because it's in a different time zone. So these things, they don't pan out. They don't actually, the evidence never holds up. It always just falls away. And another thing is, it doesn't make any sense. Like, why would they have an entire village, the entire village of Newtown, of Sandy Hook, there's the whole surrounding area, Newtown and Sandy Hook. They'd have hundreds of people pretend that their children were killed to do what? Like nothing happened. There was sales of guns increased. Almost no new legislation was passed. Nobody's guns got taken away. Nothing really happened. And it happens over and over again. Every single time there's they say they're taking our guns away. Nothing happens. It's just, people go crazy sometimes and they shoot up a bunch of people, and that's really all there is to it. People don't like that, though. They don't like that simple explanation. They want a more profound explanation.
With with that sort of situation as well, like obviously authority, like the police and whoever else is involved, they're kind of coming from the most logical standpoint in this chaotic situation of like there was 4 or 5 shots coming off, like the sounds we were hearing, they're from all over the place, so they're is one definite shooter. There could be two or three. This is just the logical way to look at it, I guess, and that then obviously the media catches wind and says, one shooter, possibly two, and then also you've got to think of people who are being interviewed, 10, 15, 20 minutes after by the news. They've just been in that chaotic situation and they're like, oh, well, we think there was one or two shooters. It was, it was coming from everywhere. Shots were firing from everywhere. And it's kind of like, in that traumatic situation, obviously, you're going with what your senses are telling you at the time. The same as anything. I guess anything in any situation when trauma's involved and chaos is involved, you're going with what the senses are telling you. But everyone always goes to what sounds logical and what felt logical at the time until obviously the official story comes out at the end.
Yeah, and it's not like just the official story coming out and everybody's got to believe that. It's it kind of becomes clear from the available evidence what actually happened. You get all the eyewitnesses and you kind of correlate them and cross-check them, and you look at like a map of the area and who was where and whatnot. And I wouldn't tell people just wait for the official story and then believe that. But look at the actual evidence that comes out. Look specifically at the claims that were made early on when people say this is very suspicious, and it turns out not to be suspicious. If you look at one of the claims they make is that there are crisis actors that get shared between these same events. So you see the same woman in different situations. Like you'll see her at Sandy Hook, and then you'll see her in the Boston bombing, and you'll see her at some other school shooting or whatever. But they just base that on low resolution images, like captured from video and things like that. And then if you actually look into it and track down the individual, get like a higher resolution version of the image, then you can see that it's not the same person.
Yeah.
Because then they'll say that this person has had plastic surgery in between, which is just it's just getting ridiculous. It's just they're trying to invent possibilities. You might as well say that this person is a robot or this person is a shape-shifting alien. It makes as much sense. Like people having plastic surgery so they can pretend that children were killed makes no sense whatsoever, and there's no evidence for it.
Yeah, I mean, with that as well, obviously, there's a point where you have to say, this is just ludicrous now. Like, you're just forcing the conspiracy on yourself. Like, where'd you draw the line? It's like, come on, you're talking shit now, basically. It's like, like you said, obviously low images, and then you expose that it's an individual different person. They're like, well, plastic surgery's got to be used. It's like, yeah, we could go down this route forever, with but there gets to a point where you have to realize that you're going too far here, because there's always an answer to everything, in the sense of like a conspiracy. You could say this wasn't found here because of this, and then aliens put it there or whatever. Do you know what I mean? It can go
exactly
go on for ages.
Yeah, and like with the false flag thing, something people often bring up is that they say, you ask them, why would the government do this? Why would the government take a risk on doing this? And then they'll say, oh, they've done it before. And then you ask them like where they've done it before, and they'll bring up usually two things. There's Operation Northwoods and the Gulf of Tonkin, which are two real things in history, but they're also radically different to what actually happened. Like people often compare Operation Northwoods to 9/11, as Operation Northwoods was basically the chiefs of staff of the military back then wanted to get a possible pretext for invading Cuba. This was back in the 1960s, 62, I think. And so they asked somebody to come up with a list of excuses they could use to invade Cuba. And this person went away and he came up with a bunch of things that could be done to create excuses for invading Cuba. And one of them was like pretending that a plane had been hijacked, or pretending that a plane had been shot down, or simulating an attack on Guantanamo Bay. So there was this list of possible things that they could do. The thing is, they never did any of them. They made the list. They looked at it and then they decided not to do it because no one knows exactly why they decided not to do it, but probably because it was a stupid idea.
Yeah.
If they got caught doing this, it would be pretty bad. They would look very, very bad. They wanted to invade Cuba, but they wanted to do it without with justification, so it wouldn't start World War III. But it was a ridiculous idea, and that's why they didn't do it, because it doesn't make any sense. The risk of actually carrying out these things was far greater than the potential reward. If they wanted to invade Cuba, they could have probably just waited a little while. And what happened next was the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Russians put nuclear missiles on Cuba, which nearly did start World War III, and everybody nearly died. But the US still didn't invade Cuba because really they didn't want to invade Cuba because it would have started this terrible conflict. So all you have with Northwoods is this list of possible ideas, which shows that they were prepared to consider ideas very briefly, but then they realized that it was a bad idea and they didn't do it.
I think that's one
The other
thing
thing
that
Right, go ahead.
one thing that people, maybe that's why conspiracy theorists kind of use that as an example, is to show that the government is capable of thinking about these ideas and maybe implementing them for their own gain, or to go to war in a country for 10 years like Afghanistan and Iraq. But
Yeah.
in the same sense as, like, you can't use past events to kind of prove that there's no evidence. Do you know what I mean? There's no, like, okay,
Well,
just
you
because
can to a degree.
yeah,
You can to a degree use past events, but it's more than nothing. If they've never done it, then that's more significant than having done it in the past and not doing it now.
yeah,
But really they haven't done it. If you compare 9/11, like in 9/11, 3,000 people, 3,000 American people died. That's an insanely significant event.
yeah,
And what they're suggesting is that the US government faked it to give them an excuse to promote their Middle East agenda. And it makes no sense, because the risk of getting caught just so greatly outweighs any possible benefit they could possibly gain from this. And the risks of getting caught in this type of operation are just huge. They have to get the planes to fly into the buildings in the right spot. They have to get the bombs to go off at the right time, down to the microsecond, apparently, according to architects and engineers. Boom, 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 went off at exactly the right time, all perfectly flawless, no problem whatsoever. You have to have the other building like rigged for explosives and then blow up, and you have to have all this leave no evidence whatsoever. Then you have to have the entire FBI investigating this for 5 years and not find anything, or everybody in the FBI is part of the conspiracy. How is it going to work? How does this even work? You compare it to something like Operation Northwoods. They were suggesting things like, oh, we'll let a few bombs off in Miami in the Cuban area, or we'll let some bombs off in Washington. They're not gonna kill thousands of people. They're just gonna pretend that there's some terrorist activity. It's a completely different scale of things, and they didn't think that Northwoods was worth doing.
yeah.
Why would they think that it's worth taking that risk on 9/11, killing thousands of people, causing billions of dollars of damage, and the risk of getting caught is just so huge. The risk, if the people found out that the American government was killing its own citizens, don't you think it would just be the ruin of everything? Why would they risk it? Why didn't they just fabricate like some evidence of something and then invade Iraq, which is what they ended up doing?
Yeah, which is that's the point in the end, is when you really think about it, is they didn't need to do this big catastrophic event to go in and do that. They could have easily used something a lot smaller or whatever, and just
They could have made something up.
Yeah, well, they did with the weapons of mass destruction or whatever.
Exactly. They fabricated the evidence for that, essentially, or they greatly, boosted the evidence for the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And And then they went in and invaded a country and sort of removed a leader. They don't have any problem doing that. They didn't need 9/11 to do that. They could just, they could have set off a bomb somewhere and said, they didn't need to kill thousands of people, and they didn't need to do it in such a ridiculously risky way of like hijacking planes and having them fly into buildings at a precise point. That's just insanely risky. There's no way you could do that without, a significant risk of it going wrong. It's almost guaranteed to go wrong. The way it turned out is pretty chaotic and random as it was, but there's no way you could pull it off. But I think people just lose sight of that. They're not really looking at just how plausible it is. And that's why I think people should look at things like Operation Northwoods and the Gulf of Tonkin incident, just to get some historical context as to the actual types of things that the government is capable of in terms of false flags and deception. If you look at Tonkin,
yeah, I was going to say
Tonkin was an incident just before the Vietnam War. Just before the U.S. started full-scale military operations in Vietnam. The Gulf of Tonkin is just an area of the ocean near North Vietnam, off the coast, and there was this American ship there, and it was attacked one day by a very small boat that just fired a few shots at it and then sped off. And at the time, the American government, elements within the American government, were really itching to go into Vietnam. The Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara at the time, he was really wanting to go into Vietnam. So he thought he would use this as evidence that the North Vietnamese were attacking, so they would attack Vietnam. But it really wasn't enough. It was just this small boat attacking them. So the next day, the boat was in the same region. McNamara was probably hoping it would get attacked again, so that would be enough of an excuse. And there was a report that it was attacked. And they started getting these reports that these torpedo boats were attacking the fleet. There was just two ships there. And there's a big attack going on, and so McNamara told the president that this attack was happening. The president told Congress that they were being attacked, and they basically declared war on Vietnam, and that's how the Vietnam War started. But what happened was it turned out that second attack was not real. The first attack was real. The second attack was just a mistake. Like the radar operators thought they'd seen these torpedo boats on the radar, and they thought they'd heard over the radio that they were going to be attacked. But there wasn't actually an attack. It was just, there were just it was in the middle of the night. It was dark. They ended up shooting at some ripples on the ocean. And then someone shooting and someone else thinks that it's them. There's the enemy shooting. It was this big confusion. It was a big cluster of confusion, and it was resolved on their end in 8 hours. But by then, they'd already done the damage. They'd already essentially declared war on North Vietnam. They'd started full military operations. They'd bombed some of their refineries, and that was the start of the Vietnam War. Now, what had happened was McNamara, the Secretary of Defense, had not really told the president that it might not be a real attack. He'd got information coming in that it wasn't really a real attack, that they think it was probably just radar returns. But he delayed telling the president, President Johnson, that this was what was happening. And so Johnson kind of went down the road of being an aggressor and ordering this attack on North Vietnam, and the Vietnam War started. And by the time they got into it, they couldn't get out of it, even if it was found to be a fake attack. So similar to the Iraq situation, in Iraq they needed evidence to invade Iraq. So every time they got something that looked a little bit like a weapon of mass destruction, they said, "Oh, this is a biological weapons lab," or "We found some centrifuges or something." They would boost it and pretend it was really significant, and then they ended up invading Iraq. And it's the same type of thing with North Vietnam. So these things do happen. There is deception and misleading and manipulation coming from high levels of government, but no, we don't have them killing 3,000 American citizens. They don't need to. Mm.
What are your core techniques for debunking that you use?
Well, the first thing to do is to listen to the other person and try to understand where they're coming from. I think people very often, when they hear someone say they believe in a conspiracy theory, they automatically start to kind of laugh at them, or they reject it, or they just think they're being silly, or they don't stop and listen to the reasons why the person believes in these things. And you really got to do that. You really got to take some time, see, why does this person think that this thing has happened? You don't just immediately say, "Oh, that's ridiculous." Like if someone says, like, I believe in chemtrails, you ask them why. Don't just straight away say, "Oh, they're just contrails. That's ridiculous." Ask them, "Well, why do you believe in contrails?" And then they'll say, "Well, I see them in the sky all the time." And then you ask them, "Why do you think that this is a problem?" And then they might say, "Oh, it looks bad. It's like poison. It's poisoning the sky." And one thing you can do is agree with them if they have a genuine concern. Now, someone who looks up in the sky and they see these white lines going across the sky, spreading out, covering the sky, they could actually have a genuine concern there that planes are polluting the sky, because that's something that does actually happen. Planes are actually, plane exhaust is actually a pollutant. It's carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide and all kinds of little chemicals, just like car exhaust. You get pollutants coming out of planes, and the contrails do actually cloud up the sky, and they block the sun to a certain degree. It actually can end up cooling down the Earth a little bit during the day and warming it up during the night. So there are actually genuine concerns. So as well as understanding where someone is coming from, you really want to try to find what their core concerns are that are real. If they are concerned about chemtrails, they are actually really concerned about contrails, but they think that they are chemtrails. So you can validate their genuine concerns before you start addressing the ones that are actually false. But by far the most important thing in debunking is to maintain effective communication. Don't call people stupid. Be polite. Don't make fun of them. Don't get angry at them. Because if you start bringing emotion into these discussions, it very quickly can turn bad. Like the person, if you start mocking people or getting frustrated at somebody, then they can get angry at you for mocking them, or they can get angry in turn at your frustration that you're not understanding what they're saying. And it can become this adversarial relationship very quickly. They will push back. There's a thing called the backfire effect, where if you explain to someone why they are wrong, it can actually backfire, and they'll end up believing it even more. And that's because you didn't do it right. It's basically if you do it in a way, say, "Oh, that's just stupid. Of course, they're contrails." Or that's insane. Only a crazy person will believe that. Like if you say something like that, they're just gonna react against it, and then they'll get angry at you, and then they'll just think either you're being stupid, or you're being an idiot, or you're a government shill. So you've got to try to communicate effectively with people, and which you do by listening to them, seeing what their genuine concerns are, and looking at the specific evidence that they think is behind their case. And one of the most important things to do is to give it sufficient time. People kind of think that if someone has a false belief, then all you have to do is explain to them why that belief is false, and then that's it. I kind of thought this when I started debunking chemtrails like 10 years ago. I thought, I'll just explain why contrails can persist, and then it will be explained, and then we won't have chemtrails conspiracy theories anymore. But it doesn't work on the internet, and it doesn't even work for individuals. You can tell someone, contrails normally persist. High bypass jet engines actually make more contrails than the older ones. So you can tell people these things, but they quite often they don't stick. It takes a while for people to accept that what you are saying has some validity, and often you have to go like a little bit at a time. You could give them all 10 reasons why contrails are nonsense, but you might want to just start with one simple one. Contrails can actually persist, and they don't immediately fade away when they come out of the back of a plane. And if you can get that across to people, then you can move on to something else. But you might not. You might have to wait a few days or weeks for them to come around to it, and it might take even longer.
Mm.
Some people have their friends discussing conspiracy theories, and it can take months or years before they actually gain enough perspective for them to escape the rabbit hole.
I think with sort of the whole spray in the air thing is, and they're poisoning everyone, is the people that are paying for the spraying are also poisoning themselves. Like, they've got to live here as well. Do you know what I mean? So they're also kind
Exactly,
of
yeah.
fucking themselves, unless you believe they're part of some reptilian hybrid race or whatever. But they've still
Well,
got to
some
live on
people
the
do.
planet. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, and that's similar to what I was saying before with the 9/11 conspiracy theory. Why would they do this?
mm,
When you actually think about just how the scale of it and what are they benefiting from it, and what's the risk of getting caught. Now, if you look at people like Dane Wigington of geoengineeringwatch.org, he'll say that the planet is being ruled by a bunch of psychopaths who are desperately trying to cling on to the last vestiges of power before there's an apocalyptic collapse of the Earth's ecosystem and civilization descends into chaos, which is apparently just right around the corner and has been for quite a while.
yeah.
Um,
2012
but
was meant to be
again, it
some.
doesn't really make any sense. Why are they spraying these chemicals in the air? It, it's when you look at the actual full scope of the conspiracy, it's pretty out there. It's pretty. I mean, I wouldn't want to use the word crazy, but it doesn't really make sense what's actually going on. And you could look at it also, obviously, from the scientific point of view. Scientific point of view, it doesn't really make any sense, but they're not often arguing from a purely scientific point of view. They're arguing from like, this is what the elite would be doing. This is what the elite is doing because they're trying to maintain control or whatever. So you kind of, I think you need to bring perspective. People believe in conspiracy theories. They believe in the false conspiracy theories because they have a limited set of information. They're missing an understanding of a variety of things. Sometimes it's science. Sometimes it's just the way the world works. There's a journalist called Abby Martin who used to be on RT, which is the old Russia Today channel. She was a journalist. She runs a series called Empire Files now, which is a separate thing. She used to be a 9/11 truther. And she was like, full into it. She was saying, "Oh, Building 7, looks exactly like a controlled demolition. Watch Loose Change, watch New Pearl Harbor." And she was like totally convinced. She was 100% thought it was blatantly obvious that it was a controlled demolition, and then anybody who believed otherwise was being stupid. And then there's this huge media brainwashing thing going on, trying to make us believe otherwise. But no, she's not a 9/11 truther. And what happened between her being one and not being one was that she got a job at RT, interviewing people, and then she moved to Washington, I think, to be part of the RT team in Washington, covering politics. So she gained a large amount of perspective on how the world works. She interviewed a lot of people who did things in the world, who were in politics or in industry or in the media. So she interviewed a lot of people, and she saw the world more for what it really was. And she was in Washington, so she could cover the politicians and what they were doing in Washington. And she could see a plot like the 9/11 plot was just completely ridiculous. And she would have seen that from talking to people who understood how government works. So now she's moved away from 9/11 conspiracy theories, and she has a more general kind of America is an evil empire type conspiracy theory. But she gained perspective. She was missing that perspective before. She was just like a college journalist living on the West Coast, and whose social group, a large chunk of it were other 9/11 truthers. And so she had this kind of limited bubble in which she lived. And when she actually got out of that bubble and talked to people who knew what was actually going on in the world and what was even going on in secret. And she realized that the 9/11 controlled demolition thing made no sense at all, and she moved on.
Yeah, I mean that was kind of that's answered the next question I was gonna ask you. Was quite, like, how do people escape the rabbit hole? And obviously, like you've said there, about kind of broadening your perspective of the
Hmm.
world, and kind of not distancing yourself necessarily, but moving away from that bubble of conspiracy, and trying to understand a little bit more how the world works and how complicated things would be to, do these conspiracies, etc., etc. Are there any conspiracies you do kind of believe or think they're a little bit iffy?
Well, I kind of put things on a spectrum,
There's got to
like
be
kind of
one.
a 1 to 10 spectrum. And there are conspiracies that I think that pretty much everybody believes, like the conspiracy that the pharmaceutical industry, like the drug industry, is promoting diseases that don't really exist or don't have a good scientific basis for their existence,
Mm,
just so they can sell drugs. Which it seems like it's fairly obvious that they would do things like that.
yeah.
If like we've got things um, like social anxiety disorder,
Mm,
which is people who are shy at parties, which now they have a drug to treat that. And so they're promoting social anxiety disorder, and they want people to self diagnose with having social anxiety disorder. So they'll buy their drugs. So they put these commercials on TV. I don't know if you have drug commercials in England, but in America, they have these commercials saying like, are you shy at parties? And then they show them taking the drug, and then they're all of a sudden they're the life and soul of the party, and
mm,
they're having a good time, and they're talking to hot chicks, and it's. I would say like there is a conspiracy, if not like a overt one, like kind of a tacit one, to misrepresent what people need in terms of drugs. Like they're selling things that people don't actually need.
yeah.
There's a huge problem in America with OxyContin, which is a painkiller,
Yeah.
but it's very similar to heroin. And so people get addicted to it, and the drug industry was supplying it, and they were trying to get doctors to prescribe it. And some people in the industry were trying to make lots of money from it, and so they pushed it, and then they turned a blind eye. There was one town in some state, Wisconsin or somewhere, and that town was getting enough pills so that everybody in the town could have 100 pills of OxyContin every day. And
Fucking
this was
hell.
supposedly doctors filling their prescriptions.
Yeah.
So, someone knew what was going on. There was some kind of conspiracy going on. So, yeah, I believe that, obviously that's a very low level conspiracy. And you get further along, like, were there conspiracies around 9/11?
Mm,
Maybe, maybe Bush knew in advance that there was going to be some kind of terrorist attack, but didn't know exactly what it was, and thought, like, oh, yeah, it'll just be like a little bombing or something, and we'll let it happen. I don't know.
yeah.
That's plausible. I don't see evidence that happened, but that's a plausible type of thing that you could see. Like, people did want to have essentially a new Pearl Harbor so they could reshape American foreign policy.
Mm,
So when it actually happened, they were like, I wouldn't say they were happy that all these people died, but once it had happened, they seized that opportunity
yeah.
to use it. I don't think that's a conspiracy in itself, but it kind of is in a way because they're exploiting the event
Mm. Yeah. I
as if
mean,
they happened. I don't think they did.
with the pharmaceutical industry, yeah, I agree with you. It's like it's a massive problem. I mean, here in England, we're having a lot of people that are suffering with anxieties and depressions, etc. And sort of medications are always the first thing that's kind of forced on people or down their throats, rather than looking for external problems, or people may just be unhappy in their jobs, or just growing up.
Yeah.
Like you're not the same person as you was 10 years ago. I was a massive party animal, and now I'm kind of
Right.
more at a party. I'll take a back seat and chill out. Does that mean I'm socially anxious? Like, should I be taking
Yeah.
pills?
And I wouldn't want to say like, people shouldn't be taking pills. Obviously, like, a lot of people get a lot of benefit from a variety of medications. And,
Yeah,
there probably are some people who do have extreme social anxiety disorder who could actually benefit from some kind of
medication. Yeah,
tranquilizer or whatever it is that they do. And there are diseases like attention deficit hyperactive disorder, which are actually real conditions. Maybe they're being overdiagnosed. Maybe they're using too many drugs when they could use some kind of therapy instead. But I think there's a real and OxyContin is a great painkiller.
yeah.
It tends to get you addicted. That's the problem, and there's no good mechanism in place of stopping people getting addicted. So it became this huge issue. There's millions of addicts in America right now, and many deaths every day from it.
Yeah, I mean that's what I mean. It's kind of like obviously there are genuine needs out there, but for say, the it's OxyContin, isn't it? I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, so with that, obviously, it's being overprescribed, like you said, when there could have been, someone may have like a little minor issue and someone's got a massive issue and they're prescribing to both people because, they want to make fucking profit from it or whatever, when the person with the minor issue, it could have been resolved in a different way, but yet now here they are hooked on this drug because obviously it's highly addictive. And that's, I suppose, where the issue comes from. And the pharmaceutical industry, there's loads of conspiracies around it, with like cancer. People say, there's cures to cancer, but the pharmaceutical industry doesn't want you to know about it, or
That makes no sense to me. And I don't think it would make sense to anybody who's had a friend or a loved one or a relative die of cancer.
yeah,
I mean, it's the most horrible thing imaginable. And people within the pharmaceutical industry, they have, friends and family and loved ones. And if there was a cure for cancer, they they would bring it out.
yeah,
The pharmaceutical industry, sure, they want to make money, but they're made of people, people who have children, people who have mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters and friends and loved ones. And if there was a cure for cancer, it would be the most amazing thing ever, and it would not be hidden. The idea that they would hide a cure for cancer is just, it's ridiculous.
yeah. I mean, I think, there's a couple of documentaries I watched to do with like cannabis and the benefits it can have for people that are suffering with cancer, which is why I think some states in America have looked at. I know there's medicinal benefits of cannabis, and that's kind of the main one that people sort of go to, because in England obviously it's illegal, and people are like, well, why can't they use it? Why can't we use it here for medicinal purposes? And I've seen a few. I was part of a group on Facebook. I'm not on there anymore, but it had like 16,000 people on there, and they were curing their cancer with cannabis. People with sort of stage 4 and blah blah blah. But obviously they say they were using cannabis, but they were also exercising as much as they could, reducing all the acidities in their body by having a high alkaline diet, as well as probably having treatment from the NHS and stuff as well. So
Yeah, there's like a little statistical thing with that as well. People with cancer treat their disease with an alternative medicine, and then they survive. They'll tell you about it. But if they treat their disease with an alternative medicine and then die, then they don't tell you about it because they're dead. Exactly. So you tend to hear from the ones who survived, which doesn't mean that they survived because they took this alternative medicine. It just means they are the ones that survived.
Yeah.
And is the survival rate higher or lower with this alternative rate than versus conventional medicine?
I think that's it. Like, there's a lot of statistics and things that aren't there yet to back up statements. But I think with a thing such as cancer, obviously it's close to a lot of people's hearts, and people have had family members and everything that have been diagnosed or whatever. I think that you should try everything. If people are saying cannabis has worked for them, fuck it, give that a go. But also look at the main thing, which is there. Look at the statistics and go, okay, this is more successful, so therefore this is going to be the better treatment, rather than sort of relying on just the alternative route.
Yeah, yeah. The problem with alternative medicine is when people take it instead of conventional medicine. Generally, alternative medicine, a lot of it is pretty harmless. There's some alternative treatments though that are actually can not make things worse exactly, but they can make your quality of life worse. I heard of tales of some distant relatives who would use scalding baths as a way of treating cancer. So they would heat water up till it was nearly boiling, like, and then put the person in this bath until they screamed, and then took them out again.
Yeah.
Which, there's no evidence it worked. It was just kind of an old wives' tale, and this person went through all this horrible pain for nothing.
Yeah.
So sometimes alternative treatments can make things worse. Obviously, people want to try whatever they can there, and it's hard to say you can't do it, but there are reasons why we have limits on medicine, because there are unscrupulous people who will try to sell you something, and they're not really trying to cure you; they're just trying to sell you something.
Yeah, profit basically. But we've been going for an hour and 25. I've got one more question
All
for
right.
you. How do you deal with being called a shill? That was my last question. Does it bother you at all, or do you just crack on?
No, it doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother me because I'm used to it now. I was a bit surprised at first when people said, like, I'm a shill. Like, one woman told me that she thought I was gaslighting her because she was becoming convinced that I was right. So, she thought I must be hypnotizing her somehow. So,
Yeah.
but no, I don't. I don't. It doesn't bother me now. And I just try to use it as a conversation point. Why do you think I'm a shill? What evidence do you have that I'm a shill? And if I was to tell you these things, would you think I'm a shill or not? I tell people that I made a lot of money doing the Tony Hawk video game, and once they understand that I'm retired and I don't need to get my shill bucks, then I think it gives them a new perspective. So I just try to tell people about myself, and let them see me for who I really am.
Yeah, nah. But it's been a pleasure as always. I'll talk to you off
Yeah.
camera for a couple of minutes anyways, just to review how it went, if you're cool with that. And I'll also post your link to your book for Amazon, which is, I think, available for pre-order.
Yeah.
All right.
Escaping the Rabbit Hole.
Is there a website they can get that from, or do you mind if they go to Amazon for that?
No, Amazon's fine, yeah.
Cool.
Or if you just Google it, it will come up. Or go to mickwest.com or metabunk.org.
Yeah, I'll have all those links below.
escapingrabbithole.org.
Yeah, I'll get all those links down below. But yeah, as always, it's been a pleasure, and I'll chat to you off cam. Cool.
Great, thanks. All right.